Welcome to Women in Business, Closing the Gender Gap in Employment and Leadership. I'm Michael Lawrence. Great to have you with us today. We have a truly global audience. Thank you all for being with us. Asia House is pleased to be producing this event in partnership with Standard Chartered Bank, one of the founding stakeholders of Asia House. The purpose of today's roundtable is to explore the role of government in closing the gender gaps that persist in female employment and leadership, and also the broader cultural transformation that's needed to build an environment where both women and men support equality in leadership. First, some context. Saudi Arabia holds the G20 and B20 presidency and has launched the first ever Women in Business Action Council. Its objective is to address issues surrounding gender diversity in business and the economic empowerment of women, with a special emphasis on women's participation and leadership in the workforce. The Council's first policy recommendation is to unlock the advancement and full leadership potential of women by driving reforms, fostering an inclusive environment, ensuring fair and equal pay, and encouraging new ways of flexible working. In today's discussion, we will delve more deeply into what shape those reforms should take. And I'm particularly eager to hear thoughts on tangible actions that businesses can take to accelerate the advancement of the Council's goals. I'm very pleased to be joined today by four distinguished speakers. Shinta Kamdani, CEO of the Sintesa Group and co-chair of the B20 Women in Business Action Council. Her Excellency Janice Charette, High Commissioner for Canada in the UK. Barbara.harvey, Managing Director, Accenture Research. And Tanuj Kapileshrami, who's Group Head of HR, Standard Chartered, as I said earlier, our partner in today's event. Just to note that Bill Winters, the CEO of Standard Chartered, is one of the co-chairs of the Women in Business Action Council. A little later, we'll hear from John Glenn, UK Economic Secretary to the Treasury and City Minister. We're also very keen to hear from you. We'll be inviting your questions and comments, and we encourage you to participate in today's discussion. Just let me know via the Zoom chat function if you'd like to get involved, and I'll bring you into the conversation. But first, I'm now pleased to invite Tanuj Kapileshrami to get us underway with the opening remarks. Tanuj.
Well, in our case, we've done a lot of work talking about how inclusion leads to innovation, which is a big strategic priority for us in the bank. Just one point for me, a lot of the work in this group and as part of the recommendation was underpinned by a sentiment that this is not just about empowering women, it is about ensuring women are in power. And actually, you know, in one of our sort of Action Forum meetings, we spoke quite a bit about this sentiment about how do we ensure that we are not just focused on empowerment, which is hugely important, but actually proactively chosen about how do we get women to be in the important and the right decision-making forums. And again, when we come to action planning or some practical ideas, we can talk about it. So thank you very much. That was all for me, and looking forward to a good exchange of ideas.
Tanuj, thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Let's now go to Shinta Kamdani. You're a co-chair of the council, so really interested to hear your thoughts and insights on that, but also some of the challenges that Indonesia in particular faces. Shinta.
Thank you, Michael. Perhaps I'm not going to go through what we have been through in the B20 Women Council, because I think Hama has shared mostly some of our policy recommendation. But I do want to talk a little bit about what's happening now, what's happening in Indonesia as well. You know, I was watching the UN opening plenary yesterday, and I don't know whether any of you was watching it, but Guterres was saying that unless we act now, gender equality will be a setback for decades. And I think this is why we are all here, right? This is the key, that with this coronavirus, with this pandemic, we don't want that COVID will be, gender equality will be a setback because of this. So we have all experienced the significant impact of women have brought the progress of achieving gender equality. but it has not really been consistent across the world. I think some has been more advanced than others. The challenge in Indonesia specifically is more evident because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We can see that with the social and economic fallout, the pandemic has definitely giving us a regressive effect on gender equality. In this, definitely, we cannot let this progress that we have made in the past decade be a risk of being rolled back. So before coronavirus, Indonesia has made significant progress in bringing more women into work. By far, we are the most significant contributor to gender equality. According to ILO data, in 2020, women make up around 39% of Indonesia's workforce, increasing from 2014 to 2019. This is 38% better than 95 countries average, tracked by McKinsey Global Institute. Power of parity research. However, there's still a lot of important work to be done, truly. We are losing more women in every level of leadership. So the problem is, for us, is that the women doesn't go into leadership position. There are only about 5 to 10% chances for women that can be promoted to the leadership position. Moreover, women are earning 23% less than men in Indonesia. Even the high-paying managerial and supervisory occupation, women take only a quarter less than men. This remains critical with the COVID-19 that has affected more than 60% of Indonesia female occupation in agriculture and the traditional service sector due to economic damage. So, given these challenges, we will need to level the playing field for women to participate and advance in the economy, not only for the part of bringing equality in place, but also to chart the path for better economic recovery. So this is what we are currently doing in Indonesia. How we, while we are recovering the economy, we are putting gender equality in there. And taking progressive also action in pushing toward gender equality would increase around 13 trillion US dollar of incremental GDP in 2030, as we all know, and 11% increase related to the non-do-nothing course. So I think the data really shows that this is definitely something that we need to do. So we know that the government and development agency have definitely worked towards achieving this agenda. And we all appreciate, of course, this effort. But this is not merely individual action, not only Indonesia, but also in other countries as well. And we need a very much collaborative effort from all our stakeholders, including government, multilateral, nonprofit, and business. As business leader, we need also to change the view of gender equality as the ecosystem for a long-lasting organizational innovation. More importantly, we also have to prioritize inclusive culture as the foundation of a successful organization. And company also needs to encourage both men and women to participate in this whole effort of gender equality. So we're always saying we're not just educating the women, but we are also educating the men. And I think this is very, very important. So in Indonesia, we have a long way to go. And what is important right now, Michael, is I personally don't want this to be a setback with this COVID happening. So we are doing all we can. That companies are now also putting SDG number 5, women empowerment, to really be part of their transformation process on resetting the bottom of their organization. So I think business is playing a very, very important role right now in Indonesia. And we are also working closely with our government and, of course, the civil society. And I think I personally look forward for also more sharing best practices from other parts of the world, and looking forward for this discussion. Thank you.
Shinta, thanks very much. I'm really interested to explore a little further later on the impact of COVID on policy changes and the like. I mean, it's clearly disrupted the world right across the board. But first, Barbara.harvey, a lot of the literature and a lot of the discussion is around culture change being an important part of it. But driving culture change in big organizations is a lot easier said than done. So very interested in your views on how one approaches that.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much for asking me to be with you all today. It's a real privilege to be part of this discussion. If we think about back to the beginning of this year, the Saudi presidency set out this ambition to realize the benefits of the 21st century for everybody. And it called out the importance of creating environments, creating cultures, I guess, where all people, particularly women, can thrive. And, that was really behind the setting up of the Women in Business Action Group and that real sense of focusing in on women again. And when I watched the incredibly and quietly powerful Rania Nashar, the Women in Business chair and the CEO of Samba, and she literally silenced that huge ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in January, it just seemed to me that maybe the attention of the world was finally going to really focus on women. And then, 2 months later, World Health Organization declares a pandemic. And to me, that was the moment when the world should have focused in on women. But instead, it kind of forgot them. And if you look at the government task forces that were established to respond to the threat of the virus, women's voices were largely missing in almost every one. And the resulting economic shock, as we've heard already today, lasered in on inequality. And I mean, just 3 examples of that inequality. It's putting at risk the education of girls. UNESCO estimates that about 11.2 million girls won't return to school. Secondly, it's disrupting the ability of women to work. And we've heard some interesting examples there already today, but by April 2020, over 1 million employees from the garment industry in Bangladesh had been laid off or furloughed. And the vast majority of them were also women. It's also threatening that progress towards gender equality that Shinta mentioned there. Women in India made up 20% of the workforce prior to COVID, but they make up 23% of those that have lost their jobs so far. And Women in Business, the B20 work action group and the W20 itself, they've worked furiously to get women back on the agenda and to reframe this crisis into an opportunity. And I truly believe that we stand at the crest of the most unparalleled opportunity to reset economies, to reinvent the way we have workplaces, to build back better for women. And, in my research over the last 5 years, that's what I've really focused on. I've focused on what does it really take to understand the barriers that are holding women back. And although over and again we hear that women are not thriving in today's workplaces, actually in the research we found there were some women who really were thriving. And when I say thriving, they loved their jobs. They aspired to be promoted to senior leadership. They were happy with their career progression. They were also 4 times more likely than their peers to be promoted into senior manager positions. And you might ask what is so special about them, but actually it's the wrong question. The question to ask is what's so special about their workplaces? And that comes down to culture. When women are surrounded by factors that our research shows enable them to thrive, they really do well. And there's 3 things that stand out, and these are really actionable and very achievable. Firstly, it's about leaders who set the tone with actions, not just words. They set and they publish targets, make their leadership teams accountable to deliver against them. Secondly, the women in these organizations enjoy policies that don't just focus on women. It sound a bit ironic, but what they focus on is equality. They focus on equality among men and women as parents, as caregivers, and as employees. And thirdly, they empower their employees. They give them some control over where, when, how they work. That's more important than ever, as we're all sitting here talking mostly from our own homes at the moment. But it also allows them to be themselves at work. When companies do more of these things, women thrive. But also, so do men, so do LGBT professionals, and so do people of every ethnicity. When you create these more equal cultures, everyone does better. And our research shows if that doesn't convince you in itself, that actually in these environments, your employees are 6 times more likely to be willing and able to innovate. Now, as we talk today, we might question why there are so few companies doing all of this right now. In our research, we found only 6% of leaders embodied all of these practices. We called them culture makers. But one thought to leave you with, these culture makers were leading organizations that were growing more than twice as fast as their peers and showing profits of over 3 times that of their peers. So when you get it right with the right mindset, you can build back better for everybody, for employees, for business, and the economy. You know, we just need to get on and do it.
Barbara, thanks very much. High Commissioner, I'd like to come to you now. Some very powerful messages there from Barbara. Canada has a pretty good track record, I believe, in terms of policies designed to empower women. But I'd like to get your take, especially on some of the comments made by others about COVID slowing down the advancement, slowing down the progress.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks. It's wonderful to be on a panel with such amazing, powerful, and insightful women, and to have a chance to contribute to this conversation. I am going to focus my very brief opening comments just on how the government of Canada has seen the importance of increasing the representation of women in positions of leadership and decision-making in both public and private sectors as a really key policy goal. And this does start, as Barbara said, tone from the top, right from the first day when Prime Minister Trudeau swore in his first cabinet back in 2015. He committed to a gender equal cabinet and has done that consistently. And his argument at the time was because it's 2015. Well, now it's 2020. And unfortunately, I think we can all talk about areas of progress, but also real risk, including, as Barbara and Shinta were talking about, in light of the fact that COVID has aggravated, the gender impacts of COVID have really aggravated the inequalities and particularly fallen heavily on women. 3 areas where I just want to speak briefly about what the government of Canada has done. First is really in terms of leading by example. The appointments in the cabinet are one of those, but also a new selection process in terms of how it makes appointments in the public sector more open, transparent, and merit-based. And we've seen a significant improvement now in representation of women in those leadership and decision-making positions across the public sector. An interesting factoid in our international representation, heads of mission, whether ambassadors or high commissioners, Canada is now 50% represented by women in posts around the world. So a real high watermark. Beyond that, in terms of leading by example, the government insists on gender-based analysis across every single policy initiative that it takes, either in the design stage or in the implementation stage, and increasing requirements around publishing that analysis so it can be held to account in terms of how it's doing it. So just a couple of examples on lead by example. Second, I think, is importantly, government has a role in putting in place the supports necessary to enable and empower equal participation in the workplace. And here, again, I want to echo what Barbara has said in terms of not necessarily just female-friendly, but really equality-friendly policies. We have a guaranteed paid family leave program that allows both mums and dads to participate in the first year of their child's life by staying at home, and both men and women are eligible for this assistance. And a full year for a new child is a huge contribution to building a solid foundation for a family. And as well, in a recent move just announced yesterday, the government has committed to a very aggressive and ambitious program of enhancing the access to quality childcare across Canada, which you would think it's 2020. Why is that not in place already? But the challenges of operating in a federation is something we can talk about endlessly. But that, it's one thing to say women should be able to participate, men should be able to participate, but somebody's got to take care of those children during the day. And access to quality childcare is a huge, and we've seen it time and time again in terms of why people are challenged in terms of taking on leadership positions, and access to quality childcare is a part of that. Beyond that, the Government of Canada has a number of programs to support female economic empowerment in areas where they've been underrepresented. I think, for example, of skilled trades, but also women exporters. We've seen women entrepreneurs do tend to be less involved in export businesses. So how can we make sure that while we are engaging in trade promotion, we also make sure that we have special supports in place to allow women to enter into the export market and really see the opportunities then to expand their businesses and take on broader business leadership roles. Finally is international leadership role. And here I'll just say two things. We've talked a lot, we heard a lot about the G20 Gender Action Council. I'm really proud that when Canada had the G7 presidency a couple of years ago, Prime Minister Trudeau put in place a Gender Advisory Council and had, for the first time, the members of that council actually sit in a room with G7 leaders talking about the recommendations on gender equality, which include a significant component around economic empowerment. The French in their G7 presidency took that up. We've seen a little bit of a slowdown this year because of outside challenges around G7 process. But I'm really pleased that the UK has announced that they're going to be reinstating that G7 Advisory Council. So we'll see a return to these issues, which I think is really critical at this time when we see so much risk of backsliding because of the gender impacts of COVID. Last point is in the trade space, Canada has, like a lot of countries, been very busy trying to negotiate free trade agreements to support our ability of exporters to pursue open markets and free trade around the world. But we have been increasingly trying to include in those agreements a gender chapter. Now, you may wonder, what does gender have to do with trade? But in our agreement, first with Israel, and then most recently in our agreement with the United States and Mexico, we have a chapter in those agreements which is really around making sure that gender equality, gender empowerment, and avoiding any negative impact policies on women is a feature of those agreements. And we've gone beyond that in the context of our work with Asia Pacific countries. And together with Chile and New Zealand, we have now a inclusive trade action group, which has negotiated a global trade and gender agreement, which is really about trying to get at policies to ensure underrepresented groups such as women can participate more in trade. So I think there's a variety of supports here, but I think the really big question we should pursue in the dialogue is, despite the very clear evidence about the success of business, despite the supports that can be put in place, what is the culture barriers? Why are we having such a challenge in understanding why this is so clear in terms of the impacts, the translation to the bottom line, but still we're seeing resistance?
Janice, thanks very much. Much to digest there and lots to talk about. But before we get to the Q&A, let's get some views from John Glenn, UK Economic Secretary to the Treasury and City Minister. The Economic Secretary was keen to be with us today, but scheduling didn't allow it, so we recorded his remarks a little earlier. So let's hear now from Economic Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn.
Thank you to Asia House, Standard Chartered, and the B20 Women in Business Action Council for inviting me to address you today. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. While I'm not able to join you in person, I wanted to express my support because this topic is very close to my heart. And since I became Economic Secretary to the Treasury in January 2018, one of my personal priorities has been to examine how we can have more women in senior roles in financial services. I understand that today's agenda stretches beyond financial services in the UK. However, I thought that talking about some of the work we've been doing on this important issue within the sector might provide a helpful prompt for your discussions. As I'm sure you're aware, financial services are the beating heart of our economy. And if that sector is to go to even greater successes and meet the demands of the coming years and the opportunities, it needs to be in the best possible health. Study after study has shown that organisations who welcome women's ideas, talents, and experiences tend to do better than those who shy away from diversity and doggedly stick to the status quo. But of course, the need for better gender balance should not be seen merely in the context of what it does positively to a business's bottom line. There's a clear moral imperative too. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this issue. Sadly, we know that too many girls and young women feel that there isn't a place for them in financial services. And while too many women who are already in the industry tell us that they must fight harder than their male counterparts to achieve their goals, this must not continue. But the data does show us that too few women are in the most senior positions. But there is some good news. The tide is turning. And I believe that's thanks to the commitment and leadership from the sector towards making deep and enduring change. But that work has been combined with government action. And as you may know, 5 years ago, we commissioned Jane Ann Gardier, the then CEO of Virgin Money, to lead an independent review into women's representation within financial services. We didn't do that because it was a nice thing to do, because it was clear that improving that gender balance is really key in this sector, and it would help boost the UK's long-term productivity and build an even stronger and more vibrant industry. Following that report, the Treasury launched the Women in Finance Charter. And signatories of this groundbreaking initiative commit to improving their organisation's gender balance. And they do that by setting clear targets and charting the progress towards achieving them, while instilling greater accountability and linking executive pay to delivering on these goals. And this work has had a real impact, and we've now seen 370 organisations sign up, and they collectively employ over 900,000 people. And I'm glad to say that last year, 3/4 of signatories increased or maintained the number of women in senior management. While in 2019, we saw around 2,000 additional women joining the ranks of senior management across all firms. I find it very heartening that many signatories tell us that one of the Charter's key benefits is the way that it has propelled the issue of gender diversity right up the agenda within their organisations. I think this shows that we're on the path to long-lasting and sustainable change. However, our journey is far from over, and there is no room for complacency of any sort. We must keep striving to do more and more in this area. And that's why I'm pleased that the B20 has chosen women in business as an area of focus, helping to shine an even brighter spotlight on the issue of gender equality on the world stage. And it's why events like this, where senior leaders can learn, discuss, and contemplate new interventions and actions, it means it's so hugely valuable. So thank you for inviting me to share my reflections as a government minister. I wish you a productive session. And it's good to see Barbara.harvey, one of my former colleagues from Accenture, before I went into politics, on this coming panel. I hope today's event will help us achieve even more progress towards our shared goals on this most important issue for us all. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks there to John Glenn, and a shout out for Barbara Harvey as well. So added bonus there. I want to get into the Q&A now, if we may. Already some people have asked to take part. Very keen to have you. Just drop me a note on the chat or put your hand up, do something, let us know, and we'll bring you in. But I'd like to reserve the right as moderator to ask the first round of questions, if that's okay. Tanuj, I want to start with you. You talked about practical example. You're a practitioner. You're global HR of a major bank with 1,000 employees globally. What are you doing? What policies have you put in place, or what have you seen that has really made a difference?
Thanks. And I will actually go back and refer to
Sorry,
the framework.
Tanuj, we can't hear you. Oh, we can now. Sorry, my fault.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, I will actually, in response to that question, start off with the very useful framework that Barbara spoke about in her opening remarks, and just sort of build on this. So for me, from our perspective, we have gone about it in a structured manner, and there's really three things we have done, right? The first one, Barbara spoke about it as well, is sponsorship from the top and a very clear global governance structure with accountability. So, it is really important for the CEO. We've got a D&I council, which is chaired by the head of our wholesale banking, investment corporate banking business. It comprises of some of the senior most leaders. I'm very pleased looking at the participant list that many of our senior leaders in the business who are also members of the council are part of the forum today. And what the forum does, the Diversity Council does, is not only set the strategic direction, but also set very clear, measurable targets around diversity, be it gender, ethnicity, or various other strands across the company. So, I think commitment from the top, having a very clear accountability governance structure is key. We have then set up what I believe is crucial, a group of business HR product leaders who actually review our business policies and HR policies to try and eliminate bias. And this plays back to the point around culture. So, you can drive representation and work hard towards getting the numbers. If you do not take out the inherent bias in organizations, both conscious and unconscious, in a very structured manner, you're not going to be able to make progress. And for us, that's done by what we call the integration group. So integration group has got colleagues from product teams, property, supply chain management, colleagues in sort of HR, so business HR, who have in the last 2.5 years reviewed 150 different interventions or policy or product interventions where we feel that there has been inherent bias, and taken very concrete steps to eliminate them. This includes things like supply chain, right? As we are looking at our supply chain, how are we eliminating biases and driving greater diversity within our supply chain? So I think really looking at it at a business policy perspective, a level, is quite important. The last thing I will say is the importance of education and learning. We've had everyone in the company, starting from the management board, go through an inclusive leadership training, which has focused on unconscious biases. And what we are now rolling out are behavioral nudges. So every time you do a very simple process, hiring somebody, doing a performance appraisal, a behavioral nudge, which reminds you of some of the unconscious biases that you might be exercising, and how do you eliminate that? So it is governance, looking at policies, both within people policies, but also business policies, and then focusing on education and training in across the organization, but also targeted interventions would be some of the things that we've done.
Targeted intervention, very interesting. Shinta, I want to come to you now, and you said earlier that the COVID pandemic has set back the issue of women in leadership and gender equality in Indonesia. Is there a recognition of that in government and in senior businesses? And is there a deliberate attempt to try to reverse that? Do you see any policies to try to overcome? Because this is a very troubling time across economies, across the world, for all sorts of reasons.
Thank you, Michael. Actually, if you look at the situation right now in Indonesia, I think the last thing that that's in the mind of our government is gender equality.
Yes.
We are trying to survive with COVID-19 conditions that keep on increasing, and also economic recovery by providing as much stimulus as we can. So I think it's very difficult for government to look at gender equality at this time. So this is why I really believe business has to take the leadership here, right? So business has to take actions, and I was very happy to be invited to co-chair in the Women in Business Council in B20, because it really shows that the importance of this issue, actually, especially in the Saudi Arabia as a host this year. So we are now, what we're doing right now is business is taking charge of how do we see this COVID-19 impacted, and how do we want to support each other in moving forward. So I'm just going to share a little bit of what we're doing currently. Actually, in Indonesia, when we look at gender equality in the workplace, only, I would say, multinationals companies Standard Chartered here and Unilever and many things that have done it, put it in their program, but have really programmed prioritizing this. But if you look at mainly most of the local companies, not as much has been done, right? So the first thing that I was championing and establishing is what I call the Indonesian Business Coalition on Women Empowerment. And what we do is promoting gender equality in the workplace. We understand that many companies wants to do it, but they don't know how. So what we do is we invite the big multinationals to also be part of this and share what they have done. But what's important now is we have provide also a certification. So we have what we call the EDGE, the Economic Dividend on Gender Equality, in which companies can actually assess and where they are in. So we're talking about recruitment. We're talking about the equal pay. We talk about the infrastructure necessary for companies to provide, whether that childcare facility, whether that lactation room, but also what we talk about leadership. So all this has to be included in what we call the company regulations as well. Now, if you in Indonesia, we have what we call the manpower law, right? And of course, the manpower is far from addressing this particular issue. And at the moment, what is interesting is government is actually revising this law. So at the same time, right now, we are putting the effort in how we can, for example, introduce for the first time flexible working hours in the concept on the government policy. It's never been done before, never. So in a way, there's a new opportunity for us to also look at and how we look at the jobs in the futures, right? Not just for gender equality, but the job in the future, we will need these flexible working hours. So things like this are now being promoted. We are advocating very close to the government, trying to also change in terms of the regulatory framework. So we are now, so now many more local companies are participating and trying to move this drive, to really bring gender equality in their workplace. But we are far from where we wanted. We integrate also now the woman empowerment principles in many of the, some of our champion companies are already starting to do that. But the important thing is measurement and tools, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm excited to say this, because now for the first time in our sustainability report, I can put actually gender equality there. You know, I can show we are a local Indonesian company, and we can actually show that we are doing something about it. You know, Tanuj talk about, or Barbara talk about including women in our supply chain, and these companies are actually, local companies are actually doing this. So this is, I think, a new era also. While COVID is happening and impacting many of our women occupation, we are also looking at a new era now in which business will drive a lot of these issues moving forward. And I haven't talked and touched also about many of our women entrepreneurs, because as you know, they are also much impacted due to COVID, right? So we are now providing more financing for them, you know, support in their skills, especially women in tech. So, because right now, you know, a lot of our women in their jobs, they never adapt to technology. So for the first time now, because of COVID, they have to actually use technology. Technology is the enabler. They have no choice. So we have to start from basic by teaching a lot of these women, you know, technology. You know, they have to start doing this. So a lot of excitement happening, Michael, but we are, of course, this has to be, again, a collaborative effort, you know. So we're trying to bring, I mean, I personally try to bring and mobilize many of the Indonesian companies to do this.
And it does sound very business-led in Indonesia, because the government, as you said, preoccupied with trying to manage through the crisis. Barbara, I'd like to come to you, and I think you used the term, there's an unparalleled opportunity now. So is that COVID and the disruption that's caused and the requirement to work remotely, to work flexibly, to work differently, is that the opportunity? And how do you embrace it? How do you actually build it into the future plans?
No, I think the opportunity is coming from all sides. So absolutely, we've had to completely disrupt the way we work, and things that were simply deemed to be impossible 6 months ago are now happening all around the world. So I think it really gives us this opportunity to kind of reflect on what we thought the workplace looked like and think about what it might be in the future. And flexibility is definitely key to that story. We have to be cautious about flexibility. It's not flexibility as in everybody decides we're now going to go and work from home forevermore. It is the ability to control and to choose. What we found in our study is that it's just a little bit of control that you need in order to be able to really thrive at work. It doesn't necessarily mean working from home. It doesn't necessarily mean working part-time. It means having a little bit of control over where, when, and how you work. And that goes a very long way. And as a working mum, for me, without a doubt, that's been part of my ability to keep working all of these years. But I think it's also an opportunity to really think about culture, and to really think about how you shift the culture of an organization. You know, why I think Janice mentioned, and she commented that, you know, why is it that this is so slow? Why don't businesses, when they can see, and over and again, our research, others' research shows the power of changing your culture in terms of innovation, in terms of return on investment, in terms of, you know, unleashing the potential of your workforce. So why isn't it done? And I keep asking that question. When we asked businesses, you know, what do they put at the top of their list of strategic imperatives, only 21% of businesses in our study said that culture change was in their top 5, top 10 strategic objectives. That means that the vast majority of businesses are not prioritizing it. That tells me that what we're seeing in terms of all this discussion around I&D is talk and not action. And that's the gap. The gap is you have to believe what the research is telling you, what experience shows us, which is if you change your culture, that's the benefit to be gained. And it's huge, but you have to then follow that through. And I was listening very carefully to Tanuj's comments about Standard Chartered. You know, you start with from the top, and you start with setting targets. And we found a significant difference between companies that set the targets internally, even than those that set them and publish them externally. There's something about that lens and focus that happens when you state publicly an objective to do something. All of a sudden, you can't hide from it. You have to deliver on it. I'll stop there, but do probe if there's anything else you wanted me to explain.
No, I do. Very keen to get that, because you did say that there's sometimes a lot of talk, but not a lot of action, and changing culture, even though there's compelling evidence to say the companies should change culture, it's just not happening. And Janice, I saw you nodding there. Does it have to come from the top? Is that where the change came from in Canada? Was it embraced because there are economic benefits, or is it because the boss said we've got to do this, it's now public, we have to follow?
Well, I don't want to, despite the fact that it's probably my job to do so, I don't want to portray Canada as some land of milk and honey where everything is, you know, everything is nirvana, and we've achieved some marvelous goal. You know, we still have big challenges in terms of pay equity in Canada. We probably still have more, you know, men named John than we do women in senior roles in corporate Canada. So, you know, we still have a long way to go, but I think, you know, one of my points was the role of government as trying to drive that change and create the conditions that both allow it to happen and hopefully encourage it happening. And so, sure, there's no question the Prime Minister declaring himself a feminist and really setting this as a key part of the government's agenda has had a big impact within government. But you know, translating this to the private sector hasn't. I wouldn't say that's still a work in progress very much. You know, we can do things to improve that, including the requirement to publish pay gaps. You know, we saw the power of that here in the UK, and we're starting to do that in Canada, not only in federally regulated employers. It's a small subset, but there's you know, I think there's a long way to go on this, and I think it is the real challenge, I think, is, you know, when times are good, it's hard to get people to focus on culture change and these important diversity challenges, but the benefits of inclusion. When times are tough, you know, when we're struggling economically, when companies are worried about their survival, then the perspective really does tend to narrow at a time when actually, you know what, the reality is the more thoughtful and diverse minds you can bring around problems, risk assessment, and identification of solutions, the more likely it is you are likely to survive. So. Okay,
Janice, thanks very much. Look, lots of questions from the audience. So I'll turn to the audience now. Just a reminder, drop me a note on chat or put your hand up in the participants list, and I'll come to you. Liz Douglas from Anglo American. First question from you, Liz.
Thank you, and great to hear from the panel. We've done quite a lot of work on inclusion and diversity over the last few years. You know, mining industry, male dominated. 3 years ago, 15% of women in senior roles, now at 26%. So, you know, we've a long way to go. However, when we're looking at inclusion, we're changing the way that we're starting to think, because, you know, if we're looking at trying to enable the workplace for women, I think this goes beyond what we've done so far. And we've found that, you know, one of the impacts and one of the negative impacts of the disruption that's been caused by the coronavirus pandemic has been around the impact of mental health and domestic violence on women in our workforce and in our workplaces. Bearing in mind, you know, we have 95,000 people, including contractors, globally. And I'm interested to hear what the panel have to say in terms of when you look at your I&D strategy, what the experience have been in broadening that inclusion perspective to include these other areas, which obviously has a massive impact on, you know, not only women being able to work, but, you know, people with disabilities, race, ethnicities, you know, everybody basically, in the way that they approach the world of work to create that real psychologically safe workplace.
Thank you very much, Liz. Tanuj, let's start with you, because you talk much about inclusion.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And, you know, when Barbara was talking about opportunities from COVID, which I completely agree with, you know, we talk a lot about flexibility, and one of the big opportunities coming out of COVID is that all of us have challenged ourselves to not have to work in the traditional way. And surely there is a positive talent play in that, right? There's a positive talent play from a gender perspective. There's also a positive talent play from a social mobility perspective. So I recognize that. Equally, from our experience, my guidance would be that we should not form decisions on the basis of our experience in more Western mature markets. So in many parts of our footprint, there has been, especially for women, the evil side of working from home. And for us, clearly, in many of our markets, has been an increase in domestic violence, domestic abuse. We've also seen women have come under incredible amount of pressure to step out of the workforce because they have had to assume more childcare responsibility or elderly care responsibility. So that burden has disproportionately fallen on women. It will surprise some of you that as I have had multiple listening sessions, there is an overwhelming support for flexibility, but there's been many cautionary voices that have come to me from many of our female colleagues. So I'd like to sort of put that out there. We as a company took the issue of domestic violence head on, and I'm very happy for any of you who are interested. We, via our D&I Council, agreed a domestic violence standard, so support for our colleagues internally, but also are now working with our retail bank to take that domestic violence abuse against domestic abuse standards for our customers. So what is the kind of support that we would provide to our colleagues and our customers who are victims of domestic violence? So let's just get that to one side. More broadly on the spirit of inclusion, the biggest challenge with the crisis has been, and that's been signposted several times, that we have a risk of leaving behind communities. And a lot of the leadership work we have done at the start of the crisis has been, how do we lead inclusively during these times? So there has been a huge amount of education, training, pulse surveys, which have focused on psychological safety. You know, do people who have diverse colleagues, do they believe they have an equal voice? So we've actually interpreted this idea of inclusion very, very broadly. The last thing, I do believe, like you measure diversity, as you measure the number of men, women, white, black talent, you can also measure inclusion. And the inclusion index that we measure is a very broad index. So we measure people's feeling of safety. We measure, do people feel comfortable speaking up? We measure, do they feel that their voice is heard? And we measure, do people believe they've got the tools to do their job very well? And by measuring that index and reporting on it at a country level, line of business level, we've been able to take some very targeted actions on improving inclusion. So again, don't have all the answers, but I think it's a really, really good question and something for us to know. You can't have a one-size-fits-all when you are dealing with some of these crisis situations. Thank you,
Barbara.Harvey, I'd like to put the question to you, because it is a very, very important question about some of the negative impacts of the flexible working and working from home on women, and that broader issue of inclusion.
So let's talk specifically about mental health for a moment, because I think it's one of the aspects of inclusion that perhaps has also come to the fore during this COVID crisis. And we've seen extraordinary impact that COVID has had on the mental health of our employees, and indeed those that are not employees. I think I saw some studies in the US suggesting that around 50% of the population in the US said their mental health had declined. And in the UK, the study by Mind on the medical emergency reported figures of 60% saying that their mental health had declined. And at Accenture, we measure that. Tanuj, like you, we try to capture that sort of sense of what's going on in terms of inclusion. And one of the things that I've been involved with in the UK is around taking a pulse of the mental well-being of the folks in the UK and tracking that through this pandemic. And you can see ours also tracks down. Of course it does. We're no different to the rest of the world in that sense. But you can make a tremendous difference here. Just as our research shows that when you create cultures that are equal, men and women, all employees thrive, we can also see the impact that it has on mental well-being. In a much smaller study that we did, just focusing on the UK, we looked at the openness of culture in terms of just that sort of aspect of mental health. So we looked at what happens to people in organizations that are supportive around mental health and compared it with organizations that are not as supportive around mental health. And in those more supportive organizations, what you see is a 40% drop in lived experience of mental health. 40% drop, 40% less likely to have experienced a mental health challenge. And you also see a huge increase in employees' ability to cope with stress, to cope with the everyday pressures of working, of everyday life. And those are of an order of 50% higher in the more supportive companies. So when you do that, you're creating a workforce that is much more resilient, and you're able to get out to the individuals who are most affected by the traumas that are happening in the world around them. And with that resilience, they're better able to cope at work, but they're also better able to cope at home. And so they take that message back out. So I think when we think about inclusion going forward, that whole aspect of well-being, and particularly the mental well-being of our employees, and Tanuj, I loved what you were describing about domestic violence. And again, perhaps one of the advantages that we'll see is some of these topics that have been taboo and hidden and forgotten. Carers is another topic that is coming out of this whole story. We talk about our parents within our organization, but what about those that are caring? So maybe it's exposing some of these things and giving us the opportunity to fight back better.
Yeah, Janice, would you agree that this is the COVID experience and the disruption caused by it is actually shining a light on issues that perhaps wouldn't have been high on the agenda, the broader inclusion issues, the domestic violence issues, the, you know, who are the carers, who adopts that role when there is a crisis?
I think that there's a spectrum of employers here, and what we've heard is, you know, the example and the framework that Tanuj set out is a pretty enlightened employer. And so I'd like to see, I think that's really a gold standard for a lot to shoot for. I guess I have a caution in all of this, and that is that, you know, we've come through in some ways the easy 6 months of this. And we're looking at, you know, when I think about, I'm here in the UK, all my colleagues in Canada, it's a long, cold, dark 6 months that are ahead of us. And so really being attentive and thoughtful about supporting employee resilience, these wellness issues is going to be critical. We're kind of getting to the bottom of our toolkit in terms of how do we do that. And I think there's a really important point here about how do we support leaders, managers, and supervisors who are being tested in ways they never have before, managing virtual teams, being expected to deliver results despite the circumstances, and have this extra burden of how they're managing in this environment. So I think as much as we're trying to put in place these frameworks, like actually the supports necessary for managers to deliver and support their employees, I think is going to be a big leadership focus for us.
Okay. Shinta, the Indonesia experience, you said that it's the local companies that need to move forward, and you're building a collaboration with bigger businesses, multinational business to bring them. But these broader issues of inclusion, are they on the agenda?
Yes, definitely. And it's a tough thing. Yeah? I mean, if we look at the culture, our culture, of course, you know, it's very clear the segregation between what's the man's role, what's women's role. So yes, women can have career. Yes, women can be in business, but they have to also take care of their household, right? So it's always been a challenge on the work-life balance for women in Indonesia and breaking that glass ceiling. So we have progress, but I think, you know, there's still a lot of challenges. Now, one issue that always been in the workplace, especially, is sexual harassment. And this is, for us, is very taboo to talk about it. So women never reported cases like this because for them, it may impact their jobs. And they're very, very exclusive. So while we are now companies starting to bring up this issue, trying to find ways of providing reporting system in terms of women, you know, can feel free to basically report, discuss. This is something that is still very, very sensitive. The same with domestic violence, right? We don't even talk about COVID. Even before COVID, we already have very, very high number of domestic violence. And with this, I think the opportunity for women to actually speak out and where they can go. I think this is really what government is also trying to provide, a safe haven for them to be able to be heard. And I think we have advanced now. Companies is trying to support with this current condition. Yes, many women are impacted. we've seen also what I want to touch also besides mental health is education. Right now most of the schools are closed in Indonesia, so women have to educate their children from home. And we have online, we have very limited possibility of online school because, we don't have the infrastructure for online school. So imagine, our biggest worry, imagine how stressful a lot of these women are, right? They have to educate their children at home. They have to think about their work, unimaginable. I think at one point I've seen, we are now doing a survey, right? Our fear is that we'll be having a lot of women also getting out of their work. So if this is prolonged enough, that they will decide that they will just quit, right? Because there's only so much you can do working from home, trying to adjust with all the schedules. So I think that's something that we clearly see. And also behavior, when we talk about men and women, as far as culture, talk about the grassroots, for example, in Indonesia, a lot of the women are supporting their men in trying to do work, right? And with the current situation, because a lot of them now are not getting income, of course, it goes to the women. Women are also now being punished by the men. Punished in the sense that they are in a situation, the whole family situation is not in a good condition. So this is a lot of aspect that I think in Indonesia we have to very much pay attention to. Now, as a community in the corporation, there's only so much we can do. But again, government definitely needs to get involved. We need more ways of how we can save and we can help and assist a lot of these women that are currently very much impacted.
Shinta, thanks very much. Look, more questions now. Let's turn to Jessica Yom from Rolls-Royce, and after Jessica, we'll go to Anthony Goodwin. But Jessica, your question, please.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I work for Rolls-Royce, and like Liz, who asked a question earlier, I work in a very male-dominated industry, aerospace, defense. So gender gap, gender equality is something that the company holds as a high priority. And we do have a lot of the tools in place, the metrics, the targets, STEM education, D&I committee, employee resource groups, and all that. We're doing all the right things. What's also difficult is that in making sure that these kind of targets that we have translate into everyday decision making in the office. And it's not just about targets, but also about not just hiring people, but hiring women, but making sure how to make the environment conducive so that they thrive and that they get the fulfillment that they need, so that they stay in their jobs. I just wanted to get the panelists' views on what your thoughts regarding equality versus equity when it comes to gender equality. That does go through my mind a lot. Where are we at in terms of how much can we exercise equality at this point, or do we need to keep on pushing through with the affirmative action and prioritize positive discrimination to bring up that equity moment?
Barbara, let's start with you with that one.
So I don't think these are mutually exclusive at all. I think they go hand in hand. And I think, you can do a million things to bring a diverse team into your organization. And you can be really successful in doing that, recruiting and bringing people in. But if you don't, at the same time, change the culture and make it an inclusive organization, then all of that effort is a complete waste of time. So I think you have to do them hand in hand. That's number one. And number two, when you're starting from a very low base, you have to begin to make those changes to culture by bringing more women in. Somehow you have to bring more women in. And Jessica, you were talking from the point of view of, as you said, a very male-dominated industry. And if you look across technology in general, it remains an extraordinarily male-dominated industry. I think the recent figures that were published by, I think the World Economic Forum showed that, in some of the more novel tech that we're looking at, cloud, AI data, you're looking at figures of 20% or fewer women that are in those industries right now. So somehow or other, you have to break that. And I do genuinely believe now, and I think this is somewhere where I've really changed my mind as I've watched the data and grown through my own career, is that actually those targets are really important. Those targets that set at least at the organizational level, your absolute intent to bring women in, and indeed to bring women in at all levels of the organization, not just at the bottom. In our own organization, we have set public targets both at the general level for 50-50, but also at our leadership level, at the managing director level and above, because we know that's where we need to make our biggest change. And if we don't do that, if we wait for people just to come up through the ranks, it'll be years before we get there. So we're trying to kind of bring women in at that level as well as bringing them in at the bottom. And I think when you start to do that and you start to have those role models in place and you start to have those programs in place and you change a little bit about the culture where you work, you start to create these environments where we can see that women thrive. So I think you kind of have to do everything at one time and move it up together. We've waited too long for this change to happen. So you kind of have to throw everything at it to make a difference. And as I say, I think this is the moment when the lens is focusing on us, the light shining and spotlight shining on women. So now's the time to do it.
Tanuj, your view.
I mean, I'll just sort of build on what Barbara has said. Look, what gets measured gets done. I'm a firm believer that to make progress on this agenda, the conversation needs to be deeply rooted in data and insights. And a lot of companies represented in today's forum, companies that I worked in, will say, oh no, of course, all of us have D&I targets, right? And a bit like Accenture, we've got 50-50 for the whole workforce. We have 46% women in the overall workforce, but we also have very specific targets for the top team, the management board, the MT population. I would actually encourage leaders to go much deeper than that. So for me, what really gets me excited is the number of women leaders we have in our financial markets business, right? And I've noticed that our head of financial markets is on this forum. So thank you, Roberta, for joining today. That interests me. I've just done an hour this morning on looking at how many women we are hiring in our cybersecurity teams. How many women do we have in our tech function? So I would say, don't just focus on the target setting at the top, because let's be honest, I do HR. HR has a high percentage of women. Corporate communications has a high percentage of sort of women, and we want to continue on that and build on that. But actually, to fundamentally change, and it's a point I made in my introduction, this is not just about empowering women. This is about putting women in position of power. And you make very different choices. I'm not saying they're not mutually exclusive, but that's where the focus needs to be. So, simple data. Cybersecurity professionals is a job family where banks are going to hire excessively over the next few years, right? I mean, that's an area where there is a massive skill gap. It's an area we need to hire people. I am really interested in knowing how do we get 50-50 gender balanced hiring in that recruitment? Because actually data suggests that the cybersecurity professionals, women have higher educational qualifications than men, industry data, but are underrepresented in senior sort of roles. So I would just encourage you to focus on data numbers, not just at an aggregate senior levels, important, but actually get quite granular about what are the kind of job families that we need more women in technology functions. We need more women traders. We need female CEOs. And it's when you try to balance representation across the organization and not just aggregate representation, that's when it makes a difference. And I've said stuff about inclusion enough. It is about giving people the right tools, having the right supportive policies, and calling out poor, inappropriate behaviors at all levels of the organization.
So Shinta, to you, is it about targets that are very granular, very specific, and do you support them? And also I noticed the B20, that there's a line of work, a stream of work on STEM and encouraging women into STEM subjects, which seems to be related to some of the stuff Tanuj was just saying.
Yep, exactly. And actually, we talked a lot about women in technology. I mean, from the education STEM, definitely, very, very few women or female are even doing STEM, and we, of course, more and more now, but even in Indonesia right now, we are still very much far behind. So we have to promote actually women in STEM. for the longest time, even a family doesn't encourage their daughters to take STEM. I mean, it's something that's embedded also in the culture. So I think at the moment, what is important, what's interesting is we have also talked, I want to touch a little bit about quota, right? I mean, they always ask me, you know, right now we have so few women in the board. Is it better to just put quota, you know, let, you know, government make it mandatory? So I don't believe in quota, but somehow at this point to start, you know, to start some, because we need to have some target. We need to have some number that we work with. So I'm now encouraging, actually we are starting now with a public company, with listed company, to have some sort of quota. So what we're saying is, in CEO of public companies now are supporting. I'm actually rallying campaigns so that there is a quota, or basically number of women that needs to sit in a board in a public listed company. I feel we need to start somewhere with this, you know, to get at least a number to be identified. If not, we will never, equal opportunity, you know, we can talk a lot about equal opportunity. You know, I talk in even companies, you know, you, at the end, if you don't have the candidates 50-50, male and female, they will never get the opportunity to even get a promotion, to even get recruited in a certain position. So we need to start somewhere, and I think numbers matters, you know. So in our organization right now, I mean, I have no choice. I'm setting it up. You know, I said, okay, whatever we do now, everything we start 50-50. I mean, yeah, I mean, they laugh at me. I mean, why are we even talking about this? You know, it's a problem. But I said, we need to start somewhere, because if not, we will never reach that. We will never reach that number, you know. And right now we have also a lot of problems because the women themselves don't want to be promoted. They don't want to be promoted. It's a hassle for them to get into higher positions. So I think definitely number matters, and I completely agree with the rest that, yeah, we have to start with a certain target. Yes.
Shinta, thanks. I do want to come to one final question. I'm conscious we're out of time, and I want to come to Anthony Goodman in a minute. But firstly, Janice, quotas or no quotas? Do quotas work?
I started out an idealistic young person thinking, you know, quotas, that's terrible. I've completely converted, I have to say, in my relatively older age. I think the rate of progress is glacial, and without quotas, we're just never going to get there. And if we think we're doing badly on gender equality, you know, I look at the numbers in Canada, we're doing up terribly on visible minority, on LGBTQ2, on Indigenous persons, on persons with disabilities. So there's only one way, I think, to actually get at this, and that is with quotas and really positive strategies that support this. There's no substitute for critical mass. That is when you start to see a higher level of comfort in individuals seeking to take on larger, higher level positions as well. No wonder people don't, if they're going to be the only one, they don't want to be the only one around the table. I can see that as being a real disincentive. So celebrating role models, you know, having people who are successful speak out and say, you know, and that showing that if you to other people, if you can see it, you can be it. There are ways to do it. There isn't a cookie cutter model. There are ways to make progress, but without quotas, this is all just going to be window dressing.
Okay, thank you. Final question, Anthony Goodman. Thanks for your patience. To you.
Well, in actual fact, I think the panelists have answered most of my questions in the previous responses, but I just wanted to add that I was attending a seminar. Antal recruits into China and India. We've got about 500 plus staff in both locations. And, you know, it's a subject very close to our hearts, women in business and their success. And I was always against quotas. I was always against positive discrimination because I believed in meritocracy and the best person got the job, regardless of ethnicity or or sex or skin color, whatever. And then I attended a similar event to this 6 months ago. And by the way, well done to Asia House for bringing this up, because this is a really important subject which has been affected by COVID, I think, in a positive way, as some of the panelists have said, in terms of flexible working and our attitudes towards flexible working. But overall, I've come down in favour, I think, as Janice has said, against quotas. Now, I'm very much pro quotas, and I think that they should start at the top with all, not just the FTSE 1000, but the whole of the major business community putting in these quotas. And so my question would have been, what does the panel think about that kind of positive discrimination? But I think they've all answered. I just want to repeat what Tanuj said, because I liked it. You know, if it's measured, it gets done. And I think that's really where we're at with this now. We've talked about it a lot, and really good representations from the panelists. Great to listen to. Great subject from Asia House. But yeah, let's get it done now.
Anthony, thanks very much. Not quite a question because it was answered, but you're a convert to quotas too, and thanks very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Look, we're over time, so I need to wrap it up now. I'd like to thank Standard Chartered, who partnered us in this event and drove us to do this, and thank you very much. A very important issue, and we are planning more on this in the months ahead, so please look out for it. Just remains for me to thank our speakers, Janice Charette, Barbara.harvey, who had to drop off for another meeting, Shinta Kamdani, and of course, Tanuj from Standard Chartered. Thank you very much for partnering us in this event. I think it's been a great success. Thank you all for joining us. Great to have a global audience, really important issue. We'll keep up the drumbeat of discussion on this. Let's move it forward and do all you can to do so. And stay in touch. Have a very good day, evening, morning, wherever you are, and we'll see you very soon.